Hello, I am Pat. This video is about the game manager, which is sort of a general purpose script to manage the state of your game. So here I have opened this game that I went through a little bit in the audio demo. Let's open it up and see what it does here. We basically have this little guy. He can run around and jump, and if he hits this Bitcoin, he dies. And then he respawns a little bit later. So the thing we should think about when we're making our game manager, this is the thing that manages the state of the game, or what are the states in this game. And for the most part, we only have like two states. It's either this character is alive or he's dead. That is a kind of state we're probably going to want to manage. In addition to that, let's also just go ahead and track how many times he's died. So, to start off, let's create this game manager. So I'm going to go ahead and create an empty object. I'm going to set it to 0, 0, 0. I'm going to name this Game Manager. Go ahead and place it at the top of the hierarchy as well. And I'll go ahead and add a component, a new script that is called Game Manager. So let's look in our assets. You will find this script, Game Manager, has been created, and you'll also notice that it has a special little icon. Because Game Manager is a keyword that Unity recognizes. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag it into scripts. Oop, out of sprites. And here we have our Game Manager. So let's open it up. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make this guy into a singleton. So to do that, we have to say public static game manager instance. We don't have to call it instance, but I always call it instance. Then we're going to want to put in an awake method, which Unity will automatically make into a private method. We're going to say, what is it? It's if instance equals null. Or actually, I guess if instance not equals null, we're gonna destroy game object. Else, we're just gonna set instance equal to this. There are a couple ways of writing this awake method, but moral of the story, by the end of this awake method, we want to make sure that if this instance has already been set, we're going to destroy this game object, being the game object that this script is attached to. Otherwise, we're going to set instance equal to this, being this instance of a game manager. So, by saying public static game manager here, we are making one instance of a game manager that will be globally accessible. That means that any other script that's running in this scene can say GameManager.instance and then have access to this script, which I'll show you what I mean in a little bit. So, anyway, let's go up to the top here. Let's think about what other things are we going to want to store in this script. So we said we want to manage the state of our game. So let's go ahead and keep track of some int that is a number of deaths. So let's just start with that, because I think that's the easier one. I'm going to go ahead and delete this start and update. Actually, let's add back starts. On start, we're probably going to set deaths equal to 0. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a public method. So public, it'll be a void method. That's just called add death. And all this method's going to do is it's going to add 1 to death. So let's just say deaths equals deaths plus 1. Could have done plus plus, but I thought I'd write it all out. So now all we have is this game manager is keeping track of this integer, which is a number of deaths. And whenever this method is called, it's going to increment that number. So now let's look over at our player controller. So this is the script that I'm not really showing off most of, but this is the script that controls the player. So down here I have this this death and die method. This is played whenever the player dies. I went over this a little bit in that audio source video. So I'm just going to go ahead in the die method, which is, the method that's called when the player dies. I'm going to say game manager dot instance dot add death. So because in game manager we have this public static variable instance, and here we've set it equal to this game manager instance. Right here, if we say game manager dot instance, we are grabbing the game manager that has been saved to this variable. Because of that, we now have access to any public fields that exist in this game manager. So in this case, the only public field it actually has other than our instance itself is this method. So we can call this method from basically any other script. And that is what we've done right here. We're just calling add death, just so we can sort of keep track of this. I'm going to add, actually I don't need to make this public, I'm just going to say void update, end up adding that update method back. I'm just going to say debug.log deaths. This is just going to constantly print to console how many deaths we have had in our game. Just printing out the value of this variable. So let's go back to our editor. So now, if we've done everything correctly, so down here in the corner, you can see this 0. It's printing out 0 because currently there are 0 deaths. If we go up and die, now that has become a 1. If we die again, it has now become a 2. Here, I will show that off. This is what the console looks like. So we know now that our game manager is keeping track of the number of deaths. So, in addition to that, let's try to keep track of when the player's alive and when the player's dead. So, another way of keeping track of state that I think is a little bit more common is using enums, or enumerators. So I'm going to say enum, let's say player state. There's probably a better name for that, but let's just keep with that. I'm just going to say alive, dead. So basically, these are now 2 states that the player can be in. The player is either alive or dead. So we need to store an instance of this player state. I'm going to call it state. So at start, our deaths are 0, and our state is going to be set equal to player. Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, that'll work. Player state dot alive. So notice this enum has basically created a new type of variable, being a player state, and that variable can hold 2 values, either alive or dead. And here all we're doing is we're creating one instance of this new kind of variable. And then at start, we're setting that state equal to alive, which we access a state of an enum by saying the name of it, dot, and then whatever that state is. Or whatever that thing in the enumerator is. So instead of, actually, I guess, well, let's make a couple other methods here. So we're going to say public void die. It's getting a little morbid. We're going to create another method that is public void spawn. Basically, we want die to be called when the player dies, and spawn to be called when the player spawns. So here we can just say state equals player state dot dead, and then in spawn, we're just going to set them alive. So it's as simple just switching between two states, basically. And now, instead, in this update, instead of logging the number of deaths, we're just going to log the state. Okay. So now if we go to this player controller, in die, instead of calling add death, or I guess in addition to calling add death, we're also going to call game manager.instance.die. And then in our respawn method, which we also have, we're just going to go ahead and call game manager.instance.spawn. Okay. So this should always keep the state that's stored in the game manager. It'll keep it so it's always keeping track of whether the player is alive or dead. Let's go ahead and try this out in editor. Once again, at the bottom, we'll see the player is alive. So it's printing out alive. And if we click this, oh, now the player is dead. Then once they have respawned, they are once again alive. This is a very simple example of what the game manager can keep track of. Of course, keeping track of the player's deaths in two separate ways is pretty rare to do, probably. Like this kind of thing is a little bit weird. It's kind of redundant. But I hope that you guys will find some instances in your games where you can use something like this to do something that's a little bit more complicated, hopefully. So in addition to this, with this number of deaths that we're keeping track of, we're probably going to want to display that to the player in a way other than just debugging or sending some sort of message to the debug log. So instead of this, we're going to create some sort of UI that just shows off that stat. It's a little bit beyond the scope of just Game Manager, but I thought I might as well include it because it's relatively quick. So we're just going to go to UI in our hierarchy and click text. So whenever we add a text to something that has no UI elements, it's going to add this canvas, which is where UI lives, basically, this event system, and the text itself that we just tried to add. And also notice that when we add a canvas, it's actually much larger than the rest of our scene. There are a lot of reasons for that. We don't need to get into it. Okay, so now we have this text object. I don't know exactly where it is in this. Let's see if we can find it. I'm not really seeing it in the scene. It might be because of the color of this thing. Oh, okay, there it is. I double-clicked it. It's actually because it's way below the canvas itself. So I'm just going to use that move tool. Let's move it up to like the upper left. Actually, no. Let's say bottom left corner. In the bottom left corner, this is going to be our number of deaths. So just to start off, it's going to say deaths, and 0. And I'm also going to increase the font size a little bit. Increase the size of this little box itself. And just go ahead and check best fit. So in here we have a set of text options. I encourage everyone to fiddle around with them. But we have a min size and max size in this best fit box. So setting up a max like that. Okay, now I'm just increasing basically the size of the text here. So one thing you might notice is that as we change the dimensions of the box, the text is right here, going right off screen. So Unity's way of combating that, but basically making, no matter what aspect ratio your text or whatever UI element stays on the screen, their way of combating that is with anchors, which that's what these little triangles are. I don't want to really get into anchors too much, but I'd say general rule of thumb, if you are going to place any UI element on the screen, let's Let's get it to like 16:9. That's a typical aspect ratio. Ooh, that's kind of gross, actually. 4:3. Oh, that's worse. Let's go ahead back to 16:9. Let's get this this deaths like where we want it to be on the screen, and then just drag our anchors, these little triangles, so they fit the corners of the text box that we've created, or the corners of any UI element that we've created. That's gonna keep it basically at this part of the screen. Anchors work by percentages of the screen. Again, we don't really need to get into like the math that they do, but now if we rotate this around, we'll notice that that depth 0 is pretty much staying at the same part of the screen no matter what size box we do. We can change the aspect ratio and it'll still basically fit. So depths is staying on the screen at least. Okay, so we have this UI element of text. I'm going to call it depths count. Just renaming that real quick. And it's staying on screen all times because we've dealt with the anchors here. Let's just make it so now our game manager is going to update this count. So let's go back to the script. So right up here, we're going to want to store a new variable. This is just the easiest way to do it. We're going to say public text, and just call this deaths count or something like that. Deaths counter is what I'll call it. So you'll notice that text is an object that we see out in the editor. It's this text object that is attached to our game object or text component. But it has this little red squiggly under because by default Unity doesn't recognize it as a library it can access. So instead up here, I'm just going to say using unityengine.ui. What that does is it imports the UI library or UI classes, I guess. Similar to a Java import statement, just in C# we use the using language. So now we've imported this UI, and now we have this text object. So this public text object, I just want to create a link between this script and our text object. So to do that, I'm going to go back to our game manager. So now we have this deaths counter here that appears in the inspector. And we just want to click and drag deaths count onto that. Deaths count being this game object that has this text. So I just clicked and dragged that onto the game manager's little box here. And now we can access that text from our game manager script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a void method called update UI. I'm going to keep it lowercase u because we're doing camel casing. And what we want to do is we want to get this text object. So we say deaths counter dot text. That is grabbing the text itself that is attached to this text object. I know that sounds kind of redundant, but if you look over here at the object itself, or the component is called text. Within that component text itself has an attribute that is also called text right here. So what we want to access is actually this attribute. So going back to the script, we're going to say deathscounter.text equals deaths : plus, and then the int we have stored up here called deaths. So if we call this update UI, it will, because it's now been linked to our text object, it's going to update this field to have the correct number of deaths that we have counted. So now what we just need to figure out is, when do we call update UI? One option is just to place it in update. That would actually be doing like way more work than we need. So it would of course work, and it's probably not that much work. It's probably not going to like slow down our game, but just out of the interests of doing some good software engineering, I'm going to place it just anywhere where our number of deaths changes, which happens to just be in this method. So we're just going to call update UI right in add death. So whenever the value of deaths changes, we're going to update the UI to show that. Okay, so now if everything has worked right, we go to play our game. We have this deaths right here. We jump. Now our number of deaths has gone up. So now that state that we have stored in our game manager is being reflected right here on our UI.
Yes. Yes.